Hello and welcome to the Content Creator Seminar number 2. Today we're gonna continue pretty much where we left off. So if you followed through the first seminar, you'll be able to jump right into it. Now today I won't be going through everything that we learned the last time. I will still explain everything that I do while I do it, but we'll concentrate on the new things that we haven't learned yet. So if you checked out the preview video that I sent with the asset package, it shows the flow that we're going to try to do today, and I hope we have time for it. But I've reserved about 45 minutes for this video, so we'll see how far we get. So I'm gonna first share my screen, so you will be able to see what I do. There we go. Now, this is where we left off the last time around. We had built the beginning of the flow, and move that away. We had defined a few important things to begin with. So, for example, we had created one logic block, which was the blue one, and we had defined in the globals menu that it is a start block of the tutorial. Let's see what kind of a flow we created the last time around, just to refresh your memory a bit.
Welcome to Escape from Babylon.
So this
Tap
is
forward to start.
This is the starting step. It's an autoplay off, since it requires player input. It had the moving background to give a little bit of movement, so there are no kind of dead steps on it.
In Escape from Babylon, you have escaped
This step continued from the last one and started scrolling the image
from
down
captivity
a bit, just
and have to
give it
flee
a
the
little
evil
movement
warlord who
once
is
again.
coming after you. How many players?
This is the first block that has interactivity in it. It asks how many players, and depending on the choice we make,
2 players. Welcome.
the tutorial continues. So the choose amount of players step was here, and when you click 2 players, it automatically gives the command to go to the 2-player thing. So let's continue then. The next step I had in the example was to shuffle the cards. Let's start with that, how to do a shuffle animation. Previously we already had created the deck object and the card object, so we don't need to look into those today. They are all already in the library. We'll start by creating a new content block from the button below, and we'll set it here so it flows nicely from left to right. First of all, let's give it a name. This was called set 004 shuffle, and it should show all the buttons, and the autoplay should be off because it asks players to do something. Let's do now shuffle the deck, give it a text to speech, which we defined the last time around when we started in the settings menu, and save. So now it gave it a name, and let's get into it. So first thing we do in this scene, we'll select the move tool and move the deck to the scene. I'm gonna rotate the camera to a bit nicer angle. I'm gonna do that by pressing Alt, and the eye appears, and then I will rotate and zoom with the mouse wheel until it's a nice little angle. Having everything from straight above or straight from the side isn't as interesting as giving it a little bit of an angle, so I tend to like to use angles like this. I'm gonna center the camera here, so it will have a little bit of space on its sides and bottom for the cards to appear a bit later on. Now the camera controls here, as I mentioned last time, you can save your camera angle with the save tutorial camera, and these ones are the default views that we will also use later, but we don't need right now. So now that I have saved my camera angle with this button, when I save this step and close it, it will automatically return to that. This is also the view that we will have when we use the tutorial. Just a second. Here we go. So first things first. Now I have dragged this deck to the scene, but I need to set it to a correct level. It's very easy to make the mistake of starting adding objects that aren't in the ground level by accident. This means that they will cast either don't cast any shadows, or the shadows will be casted in the wrong place. So it's very important to keep in mind, especially in the beginning, to set everything in the ground level that should be in the ground level, and every object that is on top of something else is actually in the correct place. So let's snap this object to the ground. You can use Shift plus G or just this button here on the top left corner. Now you can see that it set it on the ground level. That's perfect for us. The ground level is defined in every object by an anchor point. So, but that's small details that we don't need to look into right now. So let's see. Yep, that is the tutorial view. Now we need cards. Let's put a card here in the scene. So we want to do a shuffle animation first, and we need at least 3 cards to do a small shuffle animation. There are many ways to do shuffle animations, but I'm gonna show you one quick way to do it. I'm gonna drag the object by using the rotate tools and move tools, and then I'm gonna turned it also upside down. Now this should be put on top of the deck here, and the best way to do that is to use the viewpoints here. When I click the middle button here, it basically takes out the perspective, and it means that putting cards, aligning cards is much easier using that. That's also the same view we use when we create steps that have buttons in them, so everything is in the right scale or identical scale. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in a bit with the mouse wheel and the move tool, and I had the eye view here, axle view, so it's very easy for me to place this object on top of the deck. So it doesn't clip into it, but it's right there on top of it. Okay, now this button here duplicates the object. When I click it, it creates an instant copy that goes inside the first one. So now I have 2 cards, and then I'm going to copy another one, and that'll be 3 cards. This is what I need to do the shuffle animation. It doesn't matter if there's a pixel between the asset. You can't really tell it, but try to keep it as close as possible, but so that they do not clip into each other. So let's go back into our tutorial view. You can see that the cards are aligned badly since I was using one angle, but they are easy to move. I'll just select them all by using the bounding box and move them to the correct place. There we go. Now I'll pick the first card. It's the one on the top. And the button here is our template animation library. We don't have that many yet, but you can already use these. These are pretty... this will make your life a bit simpler when you need to do a card flip or a shuffle or rotate something or do a quick scaling. This will help you out. So I'm gonna open up the timeline editor here. I have this object selected, and I'm gonna give it a card shuffle animation. This is a very simple animation that will drag the card and do a loop around. And then I'm gonna give it a loop after all animations. Tap here. So eventually that will keep looping nicely. I will do the same for this object, but one way to do it is to give it another one of these card shuffles, but another way to do it is to use the copy animation button here. When I click it, it copies this animation. I select an object, I paste and replace the animation, and it creates the exact same animation. Now I do not want the cards to start shuffling. Oh, actually that went to the wrong place. Let's fix that. It's also good to make mistakes so you can see how they're fixed. I'm gonna set it in the right place and remove all animations. There we go. Now I'm gonna paste and replace the animation when the initial card is in its beginning spot. So now you can see that the two cards are moving at the same time. I want to give the other card a little bit of breather so it doesn't start going immediately. That's the way I want to do it. And I will give it a loop after all animations as well. Now I want to copy this animation and take the third card and give that paste the animation there as well. Drag it a bit and give it a loop, and now you can see animation like this. Now I don't want it to loop immediately since it looks a bit funny. One way to do it is to create an empty segment to one of the objects. Now since I chose the loop after all animations option to all the cards, the timeline will go to the last very frame that I have added here in one of the timelines, and after this all objects are going to loop. So when I save this, you should see the end result. There we go. Let's use the preview here, and this could be our shuffle the cards. Now it loops from here. Perfect. This is exactly what we wanted to do. Let's save and close. And see the end result here.
Now shuffle the deck.
That's perfect. It doesn't matter that the cards don't actually go inside the deck and stuff like that. You could do that. It takes a bit more time. I'm just showing, highlighting different techniques in this seminar. So this is one way to do it, and that suits our purposes very well. Now, the next thing that we want to do is to deal out cards from top of that deck. Now the tutorial needs to know how many players are playing. So that requires us to start using logic. Before we do that, I'm going to connect these blocks so that the flow continues. I will use this button here. It creates the flow, or the other option was to add it to the next block in the side inspector, like that. Two ways of connecting blocks. There we go. Now let's start by creating the logic block. This block will now, the flow will go to that, and that will define the path we are going to take next. I'm going to name it logic how many players. Before we actually start adding the logic inside the block, we need to understand how logic works and how variables work. Now, we took a quick look on the globals menu the last time, but now I'm gonna take a bit closer look. So let's open this up. Now, these variables are basically containers that save data. For example, in this tutorial, when you choose the amount of players, if you choose 2, we need to save it somewhere. So we do save them in variables. We have the default variables here that you can use, that we have created beforehand for every project. These are the default things you can see in every project and every game. How many players are playing? Is there a counter that you need to use, like after 30 minutes something happens? What is the round? What is the turn? And then there are control variables which control the visuals, for example, the forward and backward buttons if you want to change them, the start step of the tutorial. and this is important, minimum block duration. This means that the minimum block duration is now 10 seconds. We will cut it down to, for example, 2. This means that if everything has been played in the tutorial, it will change to the next step before the 10 seconds hits. This is the start tutorial next block that we set that will start the tutorial. And then there are a couple of others things here. You probably don't need to even touch most of the control variables, but they are good to check through. In the custom variables section, you can create your own. For example, if you want to create a variable called meeple color, where when player selects a meeple, it saves the color as red, for example. You can create your own variables here. We don't need to do that right now. That will be a subject for a later seminar. So right now what we're concentrating on is players count. How many players are in the game? If we don't give it any value right now, by default it's 0. So let's go and see how we define that. We open up the step that has the buttons. So right now when we take a look at this button, when we open the inspector, we gave it a little bit of logic here, which was just a click action of go to block this. Now let's give it a little bit of more logic, and we will set variable, and we will start typing players count. So now when you click this button or tap this button, the first thing this button will do is set players count as 2. Then it continues to that block. Let's do the same for this. Add a new one. We drag it here. We set variables as players count as 3. There we go. Now when a player comes here and pushes this button, first it sets the players count as 2 and then continues. This means that going forward from this block, the tutorial will have a container that says that players count is 2. So let's first create a little bit of a logic here. Before we have the steps, we cannot do the logic, or it's not worth doing the logic. So let's do the steps first. We want to continue where we left off, since we deal the cards from top of the deck. So we will duplicate the block. These were the options on how we handle the smart objects. Clear is that every object is in the beginning of its animation segment. Keep is keeping the whole animation segment intact, and sync is the last frame of those animation segments. We will use the sync since we want to continue where we left off in the previous step. Let's do that. There we go. Let's say this is the set 5. It's called deal cards to players. Autoplay off. Deal each card one. No, deal each player 1 card. There we go. Autoplay once again is false, since it asks players to do something. Then we will save the positions. Now we need the other block as well, which is called, let's duplicate this for now. Actually drag them a bit forward so you can it's easier to see the flow. Set up 6 deal cards, 3 players, deal each player 1 card. That is perfect. Now we have those blocks defined, so we can go and actually create logic. There are several ways on how to work with logic, but this is probably the most intimidating thing about the tool, so let's try to create very simple things in a very clear manner. So first of all, we could create the same sort of definitions here in the logic blocks as we did in the previous step, which means we can add set variables, have them go to block, and all the other options here. But right now we don't need that. We need an actual logic where if something happens, then do this. I will delete these. And that happens with a condition. We need condition. If this, then that. That is a condition in programming. We will add a group and tell this is the variable that it tries to read. Players count equals, these are the operators, equals, not equals, greater than. We've gone through this in the guide. Let's not delve into that. EQ means in this instance equals to. Then go to block to set 005, deal cards to players. Save. Now, when the flow comes here, it checks if the players count equals 2. Then it goes to this step. I could add an else here. If not, then it goes to another step. That's one way to do it. So I could add the go to block here. So it goes here, or if that doesn't happen, then go here. I'm going to show another way. I'm going to add another condition, and I'm going to give it a players count equals 3, then go to block, deal cards 3 players. Now, now the tutorial, when it comes here, it starts reading the logic from top to bottom. It checks if players count is 2, it goes here. If it's not, it continues downwards, then it comes here. If player count is 3, then it goes to this step. Since when the tutorial comes to this step, it has to be, the players count has to be either 2 or 3. Since we defined them here, there is no way players can access this step before defining the players. The tutorial will continue. So now, if the players have chosen 2 players, it will go to this. If the players have chosen 3 players, logic will read and go here. Perfect. Now let's do dealing cards animation. This is exactly where we left off the last time, and we need to deal. Actually, let's start with dealing 3 cards. It's a bit simpler to remove card. Let's start animating this. We need to deal 3 cards, and we'll do 1 card on each side. So choose the object, add record animation, move the card. I will rotate it a bit. I don't want to start lowering it because it will clip through the deck. So like that. So now it should rotate and go a bit that way. Actually, I'm going to put it change end. When I right click this animation segment and change end, I can realign the ending position. I want to drag it a bit forward so I can start lowering it. There. Now, and it's a loop, and then I will record another animation. I will drag it to a straight position, and then I will use the snap to ground button. It snaps to ground, and drag it a bit forwards and save. There we go. The speed is the first segment is slow and the other one is a bit even slower, so we will retime it. I will shorten that a bit and shorten this a bit more. Drag it to about starting in half a second so it doesn't start immediately when a step changes. That can be a bit disorienting if something happens immediately when the slide changes. So let's see. Perfect. Now on to the next card. It's here. I'm gonna record the animation, put it here, and now I don't need to rotate it. I'll just add one segment here and the other one drop, snap to ground and then drag it a bit forwards. There we go. Once again, it's probably slow. I'm gonna retime it starting from 1 second. Let's see. First card, second card. It's a bit too fast, so realign a little bit. Perfect. Then third card, same thing. 1, 2, third one is here. Record animation, rotate a little bit, drag it away from the deck, there. Then another segment, rotate it all the way, snap to ground, and then drag it away a bit, there. It start from 1.5 seconds, retime it a little bit, like that, and then as the last time, we don't want these cards to loop immediately. It will look pretty funny when they just loop immediately. So I want to create an empty segment at, for example, 5 seconds. Now the tutorial will always go to 5 or let's say 5.5 seconds before it loops. That should be it. Let's try it out.
Deal each player 1 card.
That is exactly what I wanted to do, and now it loops after 5 seconds. Now, I don't want to recreate everything, so I will first of all remove, that was the wrong step. I'm gonna remove the card deck from the 2-player step, like that, so it's an empty step now. I'm gonna save and close. Then I'm going to sync blocks and sync all the objects, conditional smart objects, to that. So now it takes everything from 3-player block to the 2-player block, and I should have the animation here. Perfect. Now I want to remove one card. Let's say this one. I'm gonna just select it, and remove it. And now it will take a bit too long for that card to start dealing out, so I will just retime it to 1/2 second by dragging it in the view and retime this to 1 second and shorten this up to 5. So that's how easy it is to copy assets from one step to another. There are other ways to do it, but this is one way. So now
Deal each player 1 card.
Deal 2 cards. Perfect. Now, let's carry on. Then we need to do, what was the next thing in the tutorial? We should place the game board on the table. Now we haven't created the game board object yet. We should do that, and that is done in this instance with a custom object. So first of all, let's go to Asset Explorer. We need to upload the assets there first. There we go. We will open the components. There isn't a folder for this yet, so let's create one. We have the asset package, which has the components as well, and we have a game board subfolder in it. So let's create that. Game board, and then open it up, and then we will upload. Here's the object, which is a 3D model created by us of the board. It can be done with different, for example, with a tile, but for this example we will use a custom object for the example's sake. So first of all, we will upload the object so that we can use it and create the object. So I'm gonna drag it here. Now you can see that nothing actually happened. So what gives? The filter here in the top right corner is set to images, and as I uploaded an object, you cannot see it. When I set it to another, you can see that the Babylon board object was actually uploaded. So that's very important to take heed of. And then I will send these two textures here as well, which I will need to put on top of the model, and they are uploaded. Perfect. Now let's create the actual object. We go to the Smart Object Explorer, the same as last time. We will create a new object, and this time we will use a custom object, which is always a 3D model added with a texture. So let's select that. We will give it a name, game board. There we go. We give it a model. Once again, when we click the Asset Explorer open, we don't see the object. We need to set this to other, select it here. Then it asks for the model texture, images. Let's take the lower resolution one. That's good enough for us. Their material is wood, so it didn't give the so much shine and tint. We save it. And there we go. Let's close this and then save positions and create. There we go. We will add another content step. And this shall be here. It combines the flows once again. It's called set007 game board. And place the game board on the table. Give it a voiceover, autoplay false, since we give players instructions to do something. Let's save this. There we go. Let's combine the flows by connecting blocks. So the flow continues from both of these blocks to the correct one. There we go. Perfect. And let's open this up. And now we should see, when we open up the library here, we should see the game board, which is here. Now, let's begin by dragging it on the table once again, like this. And we wanted for it to appear from above and then drop on the floor or on the ground level. So I'm gonna rotate the camera a little bit once again to give it a bit more interesting angle. I'm going to readjust the camera and zoom in. And remember, the first thick border is the limit that you want to keep your objects inside of. If they clip a little bit, that's okay. It's totally fine to have objects outside of this, but every time you give players instructions to do something, try to keep the active object inside of the camera. We will look about that a bit more soon. So let's remember to save the tutorial camera. There we go. And then this object needs to be ground level. There we go. As you could see, it wasn't ground level, and now I need to readjust my camera a little bit. There we go. So I want to drop this to the table to give it a little bounce. That is very easy to do. I'm gonna select the object, record animation, and give it an empty segment so nothing happens. But when I click this, right click, change the starting position of the object, and I will use these buttons above, which will place the object outside of the current camera view that I have now. I will place it outside top view, it disappears, and I save it. Now it already falls. I want it to fall faster. That's a slow fall. That's good. A bit slower. Now I want to give it a bounce. Easiest way to do it is to record two empty segments, like that, one after the other. Then select the first segment, change the ending point, lift this up a little bit so it gives the bounce, and now automatically the beginning of the next segment will have the same start point as this at the end point. So it automatically creates the bounce. We will just shorten this up like this, give it a loop after all animations, have it loop after 5 seconds, and that should be it. That's very easy to do, and it gives a cool little animation. It brings a bit more detail to the tutorial.
Place the game board on the
There.
table.
And then it loops. There we go. Then next thing was to have 2 or 3 meeples on the board. Now we haven't created any meeples yet, so we will do that in the Smart Object Explorer. Meeple is in the default library, so that is very easy to do. We will go to SO Explorer, add an object, find the meeple here, select it, give it a name, meeple green, size is 16 millimeters, that is cool. I'm gonna give it a green color. I want it to be wooden, and now we have a green meeple. I will copy this meeple, it's in the basic objects, and I will do all the 3 ones red, copy and edit. Let's do a red one here, save, and then a blue one. Copy that. Blue, copy and edit. There we go, and then find the blue one here. That is a good color. Saving it and close. There we go. Now the next thing is we want to continue from this one so that the camera zooms in a little bit. One asset that we didn't yet create is the highlight arrow. We'll do that in a little bit. Let's first do this thing. So first of all, we do need to continue where we left off. So we will duplicate block, use the sync option once again, like this. And let's copy that. And as before, we will also need a logic block. We will do the exact same thing we had before, but let's do that a bit later since we already know how to do it. So this is called set008 meeples 2 players. Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows. Leave the blue meeple in the box, it will not be needed. We like to keep the instructions like this so players don't start wondering that what should I do with the blue meeple. So that's just a small nod so people don't get confused. Meeples 3 players, place all the meeples in the space with the arrows. And autoplay, once again, off. Let's start with the 3 meeples. We wanted, let's zoom in so it's a bit easier for us to control these. The meeples are here. It's the 3 meeple step, so we will add all 3 meeples here. Now if I drop this to ground, it will go through it. So I need to lift it a bit so it sits nicely on top of the board. Let's zoom out, and we want this to drop the same way the board did earlier when we did it. So we'll record the animation, set the start as above the current camera. Whoop, there we go. Then we will add 2 empty steps or segments, change the end of this to give it that little bounce, shorten it, the exact same thing as we did with the board. Now you should see the meeple dropping and bouncing a little bit with a loop after all animations. There we go. You can see the shadow on the top. We'll fix that a bit later. Or actually, let's fix it now, since this is not high enough. When we set these object outside the view, it goes outside the current camera view, and sometimes it leaves a shadow. So how we can fix that is change the start of the very first segment and just lift it up a little bit and save. There we go. Now we don't want to animate that again, so when we add the green meeple and the red meeple, let's go in, put these in the right height so they don't clip inside. We will use the copy animation once again. I'm gonna create the empty step already here so that it loops nicely afterwards. Copy animation and paste animation. I want that to drop a little bit after the blue one. There we go. Same here. Paste animation, retime it a little bit after those. Loop after all animations and loop after all animations. So now all meeples should drop. Oh, perfect. One thing I want to do is adjust a bit their angles so it doesn't look so static. Nice. Two more things to do. One is we wanted to zoom inside closer to the object. Now, using the camera motions, you should be careful. Having too much motion, too quick motions, or looping motions will end up hurting the overall experience. So whenever you use camera motions, please be very careful with it and try not to loop them at least too much, since it's very disorienting. So I'm gonna show it how it's done. So we just want to zoom in to this tile with arrows. I'm gonna click the camera motion. You can see the red border means that you are animating the camera object. You just click record animation as you would with a normal object, and you drag your view where you want to go, for example here, and you save. And now you have created the camera animation. I do not want it to loop since that is disorienting. So I'm gonna save, and then I'm gonna close, and you should see an animation.
Place all the meeples in the space with the arrows.
The camera that doesn't loop, and these meeples loop. Now we needed to create the highlight in this space, so players will notice what I mean easier. They're very handy and easy to do. It's a smart object. We'll go to Smart Object Explorer, create an object, and once again find highlight dotted circle. That's a good name for it. We want it to be green. It can be small, and we will save. This is a default object in the library, so you don't need to recreate it. So let's go here once again, and now we wanted a circle to rotate around this. Let's open the object. We created it here to the library, drag it to the scene, and drop it to the correct height. We don't want it to clip inside the table, but we want it to be on top. I don't like the thick highlight here, so I'm gonna flatten it up a bit by using the scale tool and dragging the top marker down so it makes it flat. So I'm gonna set it here. It's right on top. Make it a bit bigger to highlight that. Now, easiest way to animate it to rotate is just to use a loop option. So record animation, do 1/4 of a turn with shift pressed so it moves in segments, and save. And then use a loop option. This loops the animate immediately after it's ended this animation. So now when I save this, and let's take a look.
Place all the meeples in the space with the arrows.
Meeples, and it highlights these arrows. Now what we need to do next is, once again, let's copy everything that is inside here to here. I want to delete that so the step is empty just in case. typically it just copies on top of the old object, since it's the same object ID, but I tend to like to empty it just in case. I will select the source and the target, sync blocks, sync the smart objects, and now it brings everything from the 3 players to the 2 players. And what I needed to do here is place 2 meeples and remove the blue one. Let's just delete that one, change the positions of these, and retime them a bit so they drop a bit earlier. That's it. There we go.
Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows. Leave the blue meeple in the box. It will not be needed.
We could do an animation for the blue meeple. Well, it drops here and then it goes away from the screen. That is a good thing to do since we tend to like to show everything that we speak of as well. So you will completely understand everything just looking at the animations. This animation doesn't show the blue meeple, but it would be very easy to add. I'm going to show a very quick way. So for example, if we want to do a blue meeple would drop halfway here and then disappear. We'll add it here. This wasn't in the example, but it's an ad hoc thing. So let's copy this animation, paste it here. So now it drops here. But instead, let's delete the ending segment here. Instead of it going down, we want to actually make it go away. So it drops here, bounces a little bit, and then it goes away. We will use the place outside view animation like this. It quickly goes out of view. And then we can, that's it, save and see what we had. So now the subtitle would support the animation.
Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows.
I don't
Leave
like
the blue meeple
shadow there that was left hanging. So I'm going to put it, this meeple, change the end and drag it even further away. There. Very fast way to do a little bit of fine touching.
Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows. Leave the blue meeple in the box. It will not be needed.
Whoops, the blue isn't looping. That is easy to fix. Loop after all animations. There. Now let's do another logic block. We are almost done for today, but we'll basically copy what we had here. We could duplicate this block, keep it exactly as it is, but it creates a little bit of a confusing thing since, there we go, since it doesn't bring everything here like the then options, but it did bring us the players count, which already helps us a little bit. So where we want this to go is players count equals 2, go to plug 0 0 equals 2 players, and if players count equals 3, we want it to go to plug, it was 0 0 9. Players count 2, go to 2 players, continue, players count 3, go to 3 players. Save and close. There we go. And then let's connect these blocks so the flow works perfectly. And then logic was called how many meeples. There. And now the last thing we had was the setup complete. That is very easy to do. Let's do first 3 player. It was only slow camera zoom and then autoplay on. So we duplicate this, we sync the ending positions, There we go. And then we do, we delete this. We go back a bit, realign the camera to this position, save the tutorial camera. Now we want to do the camera motion, and just the smallest zoom, record animation there, a very slow one, and no loop needed. So that gives a little bit of motion for this step. As said, we don't like completely still and dead steps. Setup, and autoplay can be on since players don't need to do anything. Now we will connect these. Sync. Wrong button. Well, that's a mistake. So we will need to delete this block. I was meant to connect these, not sync. So that means I will recreate it. That is good. We will sync it once again. Open it up. Delete the highlight arrow, which we don't need. Zoom out with the wheel. Align the camera. Remember, inside these borders, save. Then we will add the camera motion, record animation, zoom in just a little bit, make it a bit slower, maybe even give it a little bit of time before the step changes, so it will zoom in 3 seconds, then wait for 2, then save and close. Now let's try to connect these rather than sync. There we go. This is called set 10. Setup complete. And since the setup complete steps are different, since it has a different amount of meeples in the board, we will duplicate this. We will keep the animations this time since we want to keep the camera animation that we created, the small one. We will drag this here, give it a name, setup 10, and setup complete. Now we do need to remove the blue meeple so it doesn't create confusion. So let's open it up, remove the blue one, choose it, delete, save. Actually, come to think of it, I think the meeples are in the wrong position in one of the steps, but let's see.
Place all the meeples in the space with the arrows. Place all the meeples in the space.
That is perfect as I wanted it to be, except setup complete. Autoplay true, since we want it to continue afterwards.
Place all the meeples in the space with the arrows. Setup complete.
And 3 second zoom, 2 second wait, and then it should continue to an empty step, which we don't actually have. There we go, and then we will connect these blocks as well, and it should do the exact same thing, but this time without the blue meeple.
Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows. Leave the blue meeple in the box. It will not. Setup complete.
Oh, that's perfect. The meeples are in a bit different position than in the previous step, but since the camera changes that drastically, you cannot see that they're in a bit different place, so that is fine for me. There we go, and this should also have autoplay on. One last thing that we had in the flow was a logic block that just gathers the flow in one place, which is called setup complete. We use these logic blocks as well just to guide the flow of the tutorial. They don't need to always have logic inside them, so we can use these just as guiding posts to gather the tutorial and going to a certain direction. So we are now done with this. Let's try it out, see if there are any issues. let's start from the choose amount of players.
How many players?
2 players.
2 players. Welcome. Now shuffle the deck. Deal each player 1 card.
So 2 cards are dealt out.
Place the game board on the table. Place 2 meeples on the space with arrows. Leave the blue meeple in the box, it will not be needed. Setup complete.
That works. Let's try the 3-player one.
How many players? 3 players. Now shuffle the deck.
This is the same.
Deal each player 1 card.
3 cards are dealt out.
Place the game board on the table.
Game board.
Place all the meeples in the space with the arrows. Setup complete.
And then end of tutorial. This is exactly what we wanted to do today, and we got it done in an hour. That is perfect. Now let's jump in here. So I do want to thank you for participating in the seminar. I hope you got a lot of new ideas and new techniques on how to do stuff. There's always good that I make a bit of mistakes every now and then, so you can see also how I fix the mistakes very easily. There are a lot of ways to do different things, like copying assets, copying objects, syncing them, copying animations from one block to another, and I showed a few of them, and I will go through the rest as we continue with the seminar. The next subject of the next seminar will be a game loop. So creating a loop that goes around and it increases the turn count. That is very important. You will probably end up doing a game loop already in your practice project, since most of the games work the same way, that you complete your turn, then the tutorial loops back in the beginning, and it gives a bit of different information, but you still play the same kind of a scenario, so to speak. So we will concentrate on that. The recording will be online, so don't worry about that. And I want to thank everyone for participating, and if you have any questions, please shoot them to me in Discord, and I will, if they are of good topics, we can go through them in the next seminar, which date will be announced a bit later. So thank you everyone, and have a good time with the Dized editor, and I hope to see your results soon. Bye bye.